How do you know if you're helping your adult child or are you quietly holding them back? Here's what I mean. A lot of loving parents, I've met a lot of loving parents, and they are doing everything they can. They're paying bills, they're solving problems, they're rescuing them emotionally, and they don't even realize that they might be a part of the pattern that they're trying to change. So that's what I want to talk about. Let me give you an example of what I'm talking about. So I was talking to a mom who had two adult sons. One of them, the oldest, was living out of the home in an apartment with his girlfriend, and the other was still living at home with her. And she told me she was doing everything she could to help both of them. She wanted them to successfully launch into their adult life. But she was also worried. See, she was worried that her oldest son was financially dependent upon her, and she was worried that her younger son was emotionally dependent on her. So the oldest son, she was paying for most of his apartment, and she was making most of the payments on his car. And all this while he just kept changing job after job because there was always something he didn't like about those jobs. So when he was in between jobs, it would create this gap where he had no money, and then his mom was covering his bills, paying for his food again. And he was a good kid, but he kept making choices that put him into financial hardship. And then the mom, she had to bail him out. And she was telling me that she didn't want him to be discouraged. She didn't want him to be in financial trouble and for that to hold him back. So she kept stepping in. Now, her younger son was different. He struggled socially, right? He had a low self esteem. He was anxious, depressed. He'd have these mood swings, and he would avoid responsibility that would lead him towards independence. He basically would just get overwhelmed with responsibilities. And so when she would bring up about him being more responsible, he would spiral. And that's where the mom was worried that if she pushed too hard, he'd fall into a depressive episode and he wouldn't recover from it. So she was really living in fear. Now, when most people hear stories like that, they immediately respond. They're like, well, she needs to set limits. She needs to cut them off. She needs boundaries. And I want to talk about that word, boundaries, because a lot of people think boundaries are ultimatums, right? They're like cutting someone off financially or having them sign contracts or maybe refusing to talk to them until they change. Or even in the worst scenarios, I see where they see it as we'll withhold love from them because we're so angry, we're so upset that they're not changing. And it's kind of like they cut them off. So, limits and rules are a part of boundaries. I want to be clear about that. But the limits and rules and contracts and agreements and all that, those are not the boundary. Think about it like this. Think about a property line. A property boundary defines who owns what. You take care of your grass, I'll take care of my grass. You pay taxes on your property, I'll pay taxes on mine, right? It's who's responsible for who and or what. And relational boundaries work in a very similar way. They define. They define what you own in your life and what you don't own. They define what you're responsible for and what you're not responsible for. I mean, boundaries define where your space ends and somebody else's space begins. So I'm not going to take care of your space. That's your job. And I don't expect that you would take care of my space. That's my responsibility. So the problems develop when you're doing something for somebody else that is their responsibility, or somebody expects you to do something that they should be doing for themselves, or maybe you don't allow someone to do what they are capable of doing for themselves. So that's a lot of the problems that I see develop in these situations. It's around understanding what boundaries are and what that looks like with your adult child. So, boundaries with an adult child are about clearly defining this is mine and this is yours. And you don't have to withhold love. You don't have to withhold communication to do that, to set those healthy boundaries. Actually, they're kind, right? Boundaries are kind. They're loving when they're done in the right way. Because a boundary says, hey, this is yours, but I believe in you. I'm going to give you space to grow. I'm going to back out of there and let you do it. I'm not going to take over your life. Even if that's what you think you want me to do, I'm not going to do that. So, it's funny because I feel like a lot of when I listen to conversations between an adult child and their parent, a lot of it sounds like this to me. Adult child saying, "Stay out of my life." But it would be really great if you would just take care of everything for me, especially that money thing and anything that's going to stress me out. Right? I mean, that's basically what they're asking, and it's ridiculous when you think of it that way. How are they going to grow? How are they going to improve if that is the arrangement? If that is the mindset? So we want to help them make that change, and that's what healthy boundaries do, right? They support change. So support looks like I'm not going to do this for you, but I'm here with you. I'm not paying your rent, but I'll help you think through a plan. It's not my job to make you feel better, but I'll sit with you while you work through these tough emotions. But here's the reality: when you clearly define what you will and won't do, your adult child is going to come face to face with their struggle. And it's really two types of struggle: external struggle, right? Like, how am I going to pay for this when I'm working a part time job at minimum wage, right? There is an external struggle, external problem that they're going to have to face, right? Because somebody else isn't going to take care of it. How am I going to do this? And then there's an internal struggle that they're going to face. What if I'm not capable? What if I fail? What if I'm not smart enough? Right? How am I going to do this? I don't know how to do it. Right? This internal struggle. Your job is not to remove that struggle. If you remove the struggle, they don't grow. So, let me tell you about a young man I was talking to recently. He had just started a new job and he thought he was going to be great at it, right? That this is a job he really wanted and it was right for him and he knew how to do it and he was excited about it. He was pumped about it. He was going to be awesome at it. And then he started training, right? And then he realized how much he didn't know. And the spiral happened very quickly. When I'm talking to him, he's like, I'm incompetent. I'm going to fail. Everyone's going to think I'm a loser. My life is ruined. I'm never going to make enough money. I'm never going to be able to move out. And I had to stop him and say, hey, you need to stop this shame spiral here. And I validated how hard it is to step into something new, right? To be confronted with the reality that you're not as good as you thought you were, or you've got some learning, you have some growing to do. So he had an external struggle. He had to learn how to do things that he didn't know how to do, or he was going to lose that job, the job he loved, right? So that was an external struggle. How do I learn this? How am I going to be able to do this job? But he also had an internal struggle. He was doubting himself. Right? And what I told him is he was trying to eliminate the struggle. He didn't want the struggle there, which makes sense, right? No one really likes the struggle, but he wanted to feel confident and competent immediately. But I told him growth doesn't work like that. He will not grow without struggle. That's why I told him you can't grow, you can't get better without struggle. And part of what's happening is when you start something new, you realize that there are things that you need to do that you don't know how to do, right? And that's where the insecurities come in. And that's exactly where he was. And so I needed to encourage him, to tell him that struggle is part of the process. There's nothing wrong with him. This was a time for him to dig deep, to push through that doubt, and to keep showing up. And I gave him an analogy that I love to use, and I'll tell it with to you. I'll share it with you. So I love to do puzzles, but I don't do them that often. Usually around Christmas time when there's more home time and we're watching bowl games and Christmas movies, and I'm working on 1,000, 1,500 piece puzzle. And yeah, so I just spread it all out on this table. And it's interesting because sometimes there'll be people, maybe family or friends, and they'll come over and they're going to help me with this puzzle, which I love. And they're looking at all these pieces and just piles and piles, and none of them are together. Some of them are upside down, and there's this color and that color, and you can't see the picture, you can't see what it is. And after a while, I notice they get kind of frustrated with, like, all right, I'm not making any progress, nothing's coming together, or whatever's going through their head. And then they kind of slink away, or they don't stick with it. I'm experiencing the exact same thing. I don't know how all these puzzles get together or all these pieces get together. Um, but what I do is I just stick with it. And if you're a puzzler, you know how this is, right? You're just sticking with it, and you're flipping them all over, and you're like, okay, these colors look like they're the same. These shapes are in pieces. I'll put them over here. And you just go through the pieces, and you go through the pieces, and then it starts to make sense, right? You start realizing, like, oh, I think this goes together here and this goes over here. So you sort, you organize, you stay with it, and slowly it starts to come together. And the cool thing is, the further along you get, the more you can see how the puzzle's coming together. And by the end of it, I'm just slapping pieces down, boom, 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 because we're through the tough part. And so that's what I was saying with this guy. It's like, you can't make sense of what you need to learn right now. He's like, I don't even think I can learn this. It's so much more complicated than I thought. I said, you will. You will. You got to stick with it and push through that doubt. That's what support looks like, right? It's not removing the struggle. I did not talk to him about quitting. We talked about resilience. I mean, we use that word, and he understood what it meant to be resilient. And so this wasn't about quitting. This was getting the thought out of his mind that he couldn't do it. And all he had to do is show up and keep trying and keep trying and keep trying. And no matter what happens, right? I think this kid's going to pull it off. I think he's going to do fine with his job. But even if it doesn't work out, that's part of his struggle. There's something to learn there. There's something to grow. There always is. And that's the supportive mindset that you want. All right, I want to talk about another really important piece of this. And this is not really talked about a lot. Okay. Uh, when you set boundaries, it creates a struggle for you too, right? When you have those boundaries in place, when you define ownership and responsibility and you make it clear what needs to happen moving forward, your child's going to struggle, and you are going to struggle while you're watching your child struggle. You're going to wrestle with things like, is this my fault? Did I cause this? Right? Should I have done this? Should I have done this more? Should I have? You remember that one time when this thing happened? I bet that's my fault. I bet that's where they got off track. And, or maybe I'm harming them, right? They are in such distress right now, and I've never seen them this upset. Maybe I'm harming them, right? And then your guilt and your fear become so powerful, they push you to the extremes. And we've talked a lot about extremes in here, right? Where you go to either, I'm going to avoid this struggle, I'm going to take it away, I'm going to give in, right? And we're just going to get rid of the struggle right now and all get rid of our anxiety, and goes back to how it was. Or we get really rigid, right? Get really angry, we get upset, we cut them off, we get overly harsh, uh, and uh, and people who go to the different extremes usually don't understand why someone goes to that rigid, angry place and cuts them off, and they don't understand why someone goes to that extreme of giving in again. But both extremes are reactions to your discomfort as a parent, right? So I want you to remember that when your child works through their struggle, they grow, they learn, they get stronger, they build confidence. And you are a huge part of that. You know, I have never heard an adult child look back and tell a parent and say to them, you know what? Thank you for not letting me face the things I needed to face in my life. Thank you for removing all this struggle and taking away that opportunity to grow. Right? They don't say that. No one looks back and appreciates that they were able to avoid the things they needed to face in their life. But believe me, I have heard it many times. I have heard young adults reflecting back and thanking their parents for not quitting on them, for not giving up on them, for supporting them while they were figuring out how to be an adult, right? It's hard. It's hard for both of you, but I want to point that out that this is a struggle for you as well. So, look, you need support. And that's why I'm glad you're a part of this group, right? You need the support, you need the encouragement, you need the tools so that you can help yourself to also help your children. And boundaries is one of those really difficult things, how we help them struggle. So, let me pull all this together. Um, Healthy boundaries define ownership. What is yours shows what you are responsible for, what you're not responsible for, right? And when you take responsibility, that creates a struggle because responsibilities are difficult, especially when you're starting out, especially when you're trying to figure things out. Your child is trying to figure out how to be an adult. That's not easy. And you are trying to figure out how to be the parent of a young adult. That's not easy either. So you can't avoid that struggle for either one of you. You need to work through it. You need to redefine the patterns. You stop rescuing, and they stop avoiding, right? That's actually a lot of how it is. When you stop rescuing, they stop avoiding. Now, I do want to make a point. Right? I say this so smoothly, so easily. I've been in the trenches with so many families, and I know when it hits the fan, when it gets real, when you're having those tough conversations, that is really difficult. And it's not always pretty. In fact, a lot of times those conversations and that fight, that internal and external fight that happens within you, within your child, between the two of you, to go back to the way things are or were, is really strong. It's hard to pull out of that. So again, that's why I'm glad you're a part of this group, right? And if you need encouragement, if you need support in the process, then stay connected and tell other people who need to be here as well. You are absolutely not the only one who is navigating this. We're all in this together. We're all working it through. So thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. And like I said, spread the word and don't give up. Your family needs you.